Hi guys! I know I promised content and did all those polls and stuff, but 2020 hit, I adopted a kitten, I fell straight to hell, I still got those videos, but first I need everyone to shut up. I did so much bullshit math just now, and I've come to a revelation. This all started because I was trying to figure out the WoW timeline, and I did a whole bunch of estimations on Defias and all of that, and if any of you have ever tried looking at the WoW timeline or whatever it is you have, you'll know that it's confusing and hectic. But I sought to form order out of chaos. So I joked that because Blizzard says each expansion pack is 1 year in lore and everyone thinks that it's, rightfully stupid that so much happens in just 1 year, I proposed that maybe Azerothian years are just longer, that they're just different. Each WoW expansion in real time lasts an average of about 22 months, so I wagered that what if one Azerothian year is just that, 22 months long? After all, Earth and Azeroth are two completely different planets. Okay, so maybe not 22 months, as my good friend pointed out that it would probably make sense to have 12 months with 60 days on account of the lunar cycles of having 2 moons, and that checks out. In the end, Azeroth probably has roughly 720 days a year, which would explain the entire timeline and make sense. Of course, I was partially joking when I made these comments. A guilty mind then commented about what kind of implications this 720-day long year has on the size and rotation of the planet, and immediately I was plunged down a goddamn rabbit hole. I did some quick googling. How big is Azeroth? Everyone seems to conclude that Azeroth is small, and mostly this comes from the size of the zones in-game. Some people calculated how big it was in-game, like this 2007 blog estimating Kalimdor at roughly 41 square miles. For reference, the island of Manhattan is 20 square miles. On this Reddit thread, which I started taking as fact at first, someone posted this image of a rough estimation of just how big Azeroth is in comparison to Earth. And I was like, okay, cool, so that just means there's a 5-hour difference between Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. That's neat. But then I started to think about that new novel Shadows Rising and how it took roughly 4 days to sail from Kultiris to Zandalar. I was sure there was some math to be done there somehow, and I wasn't keen on doing it. I figured there was someone smart enough to, do something with that. I lied. So I started bullshitting. I did a quick Google of the average speeds of ships and used these numbers. 20 knots or 23 miles per hour and topping speeds of 30 knots or 34.5 miles per hour. Now, I'm just some attention deficit kid on the internet. I didn't go to senior year of high school. My college shut down with the plague, so my details are fuzzy. But considering how most of the lore building in WoW is vague and held together with cardboard and tape, much like the inner workings of Silvermoon City, I think my hazy estimations are relatively sound. So, math. For some reason, I did math without homework. I took some travel times from Rise of the Lich King and Shadows Rising, plugged in the math of the travel times, like if it took 1 month to get from Lordaeron to Northrend, and the average boat is at 23 miles per hour, and 1 month is roughly 30 days, which is roughly 720 hours, then you just multiply 23 miles per hour and 720 hours, and boom! Northrend is roughly 16,560 miles away from Lordaeron. So I did some math too for Stormwind and Lordaeron, but I'm too stupid, so I'm disregarding it because what's important to me is Shadows Rising. 4 days to get to Zandalar from Kultiris. That's roughly 96 hours. Now, they had a tide stage on board, which means they traveled faster, so I'm going with 30 knots, aka roughly 35 miles per hour. Again, I'm estimating, sue me. So, multiply 35 miles per hour in 96 hours, and boom, 3,360 miles between Kultiris and Zandalar. Now, some of these numbers started to scare me a little bit. Like, did I do something wrong? 16,000 miles seems intimidating, but because then I tried to think, well, California is 5.2 thousand miles from England, for example, so surely those numbers are skewed? No, I'm stupid. Don't use that point of reference. The math checks out elsewhere. Back to Zandalar versus Kultiris. The distance between New York and England is roughly 3.4 thousand miles long, which is very close to Zandalar, and Kultiris is 3.3 thousand miles. And if New York and England have a 5-hour distance, then Kultiris is 5 hours ahead of Zandalar, which means that the previous assumption that Kalimdor and Eastern Kingdoms had 5 hours between them was wildly inaccurate, and that scared and fascinated me. So, the distance between Kultiris and Stormwind is almost the same, but I'm putting them at about 4 hours apart, meaning the Eastern Kingdoms are 9 hours ahead of Zandalar, and I'm like, oh god, what am I doing? I need a better reference. So, I pull up a time zone map and website and start digging, and suddenly my math starts lining up. I find my point of reference, and Hawaii and Iceland are 9 hours apart. The distance between them is 6.1 thousand miles, and knowing that Kultiris and Xanalar are 3,000 miles apart, and I'm assuming that Eastern Kingdoms and Kultiris are similar distances, then Xanalar and Eastern Kingdoms are roughly 5 to 6,000 miles away. So I start mapping this up, and I pasted the time zone map to what I was drawing. I line up Hawaii and Iceland with Xanalar and the Eastern Kingdoms since they share a similar distance and the theorized 9-hour time zone, and now that I had everything to scale, I came to this conclusion. That's right, a potentially accurate scale of how big Azeroth truly is in comparison to Earth. And please keep in mind that we still don't know what's on the back of Azeroth. Canonically, we have never seen it, and any ships that sail back there, they never come back. So anything could be back there, which means Azeroth is even bigger. Hey! Editing Mimi here. I was looking for a source for the back of Azeroth tidbit that I mentioned, and I realized that the source is actually from the WoW RPG, which, as you may know, is no longer considered canon. I'm just popping in to know that this point is now a little shaky, but despite the back of Azeroth being canonically ambiguous, I did find this clip from the 2013 BlizzCon Q&A that supports the theory that Azeroth is indeed a lot larger, back of Azeroth or no. So, here it is.
My question is not so much about Warlords of Draenor, but one thing I've kind of wondered about, especially since Pandaria came out. The southernmost points of the Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor and Pandaria, are all either jungle or desert, which almost suggests we're at the equator. So does that mean there's a whole southern hemisphere of Azeroth left to explore in the future?
What did you say? Yes?
And no.
Currents? We're going to say yes and no. So I think it's totally possible that there's more stuff down there. If these guys would quit doing globes with art inside of, was it Old War? Well, you can't put globes with continents. It's going to look like that's all there is. And you go, no, it's going to look cool. It's going to look awesome. But don't do it. Don't do it because it doesn't look like there could be anything else.
But basically, here's what I've concluded. There's a 21 to 23 hour time zone difference between Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. So, for reference, in Mulgore, it could be Thursday, 9:30 p.m. While in Stormwind, it'll be Friday, 5:30 p.m. And there's probably also a 1 or 2 hour time difference between Mulgore and Orgrimmar. And if Azeroth is this much bigger, guess what else lines up the length of one Azerothian year? See, if Azeroth is larger than Earth, then it means it needs to be further away from the sun, otherwise it wouldn't be habitable. And if it's further away, then it rotates around the sun slower, which means it's absolutely 100% viable that Azeroth genuinely has longer days, like my theorized 720 days per year, meaning that every expansion taking place in 1 year makes sense. In my haste to understand the timeline and suddenly being possessed to do math despite not being in school anymore, I accidentally unlocked answers I didn't know I needed, and I don't know why I did this, except that I did, and I need everyone to know. Again, I'm not a professional, I don't know these things, these are just the bare bones bastardized estimations, so if there's someone out there that knows what they're talking about, I highly encourage you to share, correct me, or comment on my estimates. I would love to know if I'm close, or at least the more accurate answer, whatever's right. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to take into account, like more real-world travel times to compare, and the storm that interfered with the Bold Arva and Shadows Rising, and like a bunch of other stuff I don't really have the brain cells for, but whatever. Either way, this is brilliant for me, at least, as a role player and as someone who kind of likes to write fan fiction for this game. It feels like an excellent resource for something we have absolutely no canon basis for. And I do want to say, however, that I'm mapping this out and knowing that the planet is much bigger than anticipated and that the years are longer. We also don't know how long Azerothian days are. I'm no scientist or whatever damn specialist would specialize in specializing in this, but I'm getting the distinct feeling that we're going to need more hours in the day for this to work out, and I quite frankly don't have the kind of energy to think about that. But hey, I'll just throw this out here because I just needed to share it. Please talk to me. Tell me what you think. And if you think I'm a delusional idiot, I encourage you to pay for my college fund. Thank you for watching. God, I wish I had the capacity to extending this energy to figure this out.